Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jolene Mujica. I am the head of trends and tours at WindowsWear. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to have a little chat about our newest trend report, which is brands embracing monochrome and monochromatic design. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. We are currently live streaming on many different social media networks. That includes Zoom. So if you're joining us from Zoom, welcome. If you're joining us from Facebook Live, Instagram Live, or LinkedIn Live, please feel free to leave comments or questions in the chat features, and we can get to those at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and dive right in. And in real time, if you are watching and you are thinking of things as you are looking at certain brands or looking at certain design aesthetics, whatever, please feel free to, in real time, just go ahead and throw comments or questions into the chat so that way you don't forget at the end. And then we'll have a little conversation. So let's go ahead and get started. So monochromatic design. So we've actually started the year. This is a trend that's been sort of ongoing for the past couple of seasons now. A lot of brands have been in sort of embracing the idea of monochrome as a neutral design palette to highlight their products, their bags, their collections, whatever it is that they are trying to convey to the consumer. But we saw it particularly in mainstream culture just this past January. If you watched the inauguration, right? Former First Ladies Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, current Vice President Kamala Harris, First Lady Jill Biden, right? All were wearing monochromatic looks. So much so that the internet sort of exploded with all of these articles on, like, is monochrome the new color? Is monochrome the new rainbow? And in many ways, yes. In many ways, there's a lot of brands that have been exploring this for many seasons. But particularly in 2021, we think that it is something that brands are going to continue to embrace and really to continue to share their brand stories with, right? So here you can see great examples of that. And if you didn't know what I was talking about, front and center, just above the word monochrome, you can see those looks that were featured on January 21st, just of this year, that made, the best dress lists of every major fashion blog and every major fashion reputable news source, from, New York Times Fashion to Business of Fashion to Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, etc. So why has this become a powerful trend? Well, many different reasons, and many brands use it, monochrome, for different reasons and to convey different brand stories, right? But we're starting to see a lot of monochromatic use in optimistic colors, right? And, you can say, well, what really is an optimistic color, right? Color is very much a cultural construct, right? Color doesn't mean anything until we infuse our experiences and our sort of cultural experiences and who we are into what that color means, right? So it is very much cultural. Red is very different in the United States than what red means to China as a color, for instance, right? So we're seeing a lot of use of optimistic colors, and optimistic colors, generally the consensus is that they are agreed upon to be light and bright and fun, right? So we're seeing statements in all aspects of our lives currently right now, from fashion to tech to gamification to interior design. And yellow is a very intriguing color, primarily because it resonates with both the logic left side of the brain. It also stimulates our mental faculties and sparks this sort of inquisitiveness, this perception, original thought, new ideas. And almost in every culture, of course, I can't speak universally, but almost in every culture, yellow represents lightness, levity, enthusiasm, happiness, optimism, warmth, right? It's just a happy color. So there's no question as to why we're currently seeing this, right? We're, knock on wood, entering, the other end of the pandemic with the vaccines rolling out. So people really want to feel optimistic. They want to feel a sense of hope. So we're starting to see this as this post-COVID era color and post-lockdown yellow being used to represent this warm welcoming back into the retail world, right? This cheerful color. We've seen it executed from Fendi, Louis Vuitton, Prada, Coach. These are all great examples. Currently in the upper left-hand corner, you can see this great example of the beautiful use of this really sweet, light, yellow, which is for a pop-up space that Coach created, which was a collaboration between Disney, Mickey Mouse, and pop artist Keith Haring. It was for their pop-up space, which is actually currently open. Over at Fendi, they're using it for their Peekaboo bar, for their new handbag collection. And the Fendi yellow, of course, is one of their house code colors, so it's a perfect color for them to introduce during this time. For Prada, Prada is embracing the idea of this optimistic yellow, right, through hashtag Prada Symbols, which is this special project. It's a collaboration with Edison Shinjuku in Tokyo. This is their women's pop-up. It's located at the stage atrium, which is defined by this large video wall displaying the Prada 2021 or Spring-Summer 2021 women's wear runway presentation. The first collection, this was the first collection that was designed by Miuccia Prada and Raf Simons, both as co-creative directors. And the video edit is intentionally black and white. You can see it on the bottom right-hand corner. It's intentionally black and white to be very cinematic, right? And to give this sort of special slow motion highlights of the most significant parts of the show that counteracts that really bright, bubbly, fluffy yellow. We also have that really pretty white and yellow checkered floor and the surrounding yellow monochromatic walls that provide this very intimate and almost delicate setting to this black and white video by contrast. Over at Louis Vuitton has always embraced monochromatic design in many of their spaces, their pop-up spaces, their permanent stores. They are always sort of reinventing themselves. You know, Louis Vuitton is the king of the monogram, right? We recognize that LV before we recognize almost anything in the retail industry. It's highly recognizable. But their use of color, they never shy away from color as a house. I love the use of this giant oversized prop and practical effect in that giant mallard. And then it is surrounded by this really bright, bubbly, light yellow. In their pop-up store on the right, you can see that it's a little more of a muted tone, a little more of a marigold that they're showcasing for their men's collection. Here's another great example of Louis Vuitton using monochrome in their design, all the way from the runway presentation, the collection, the set, even the models were meant to be monochromatic in the way that the beauty palette was designed, right? And they've had numerous monochromatic looks and monochromatic collections in the past couple seasons, particularly with neon collections. They do not shy away from color as a house. Louis Vuitton has also unveiled most recently in this particular collection their set designs, their runways, their mannequins, their pop-ups, right? And this monochromatic aesthetic is this bold way to make a very, very bold and big, bright statement in a space, right? Oftentimes we're programmed to think that matching similar colors and keeping diverse palettes in our space is how we should design. And monochromatic design and monochromatic color schemes really reinforces that idea, right? It's intentional, but it's also very eye-catching. Here they do it again with the color orange. So now we've seen it from this sunny yellow, from the cloud collection for the menswear. And here we have that reinterpreted in orange. You can see everything is orange, from the bike to the flora and the fauna, the sign. This is supposed to be very urban. It's supposed to feel like a sort of grungy street. And here we have that nice, really bright use of neon. They do it very, very well. They do it on a very grand scale. They like to scale their props up. So here you can see those mannequins being scaled up. And then we have classic green, right? So this very vibrant lime green was a pop-up space that was done in Soho in New York City. They intentionally chose this color green because it looks like a giant green screen. The idea was that people would come in and they would film, or they would take pictures, or they would have some form of social media presence here, and then they would go home and use Photoshop to memify the space and to make the space into whatever it was that they want. This was their variation of being able to turn a static retail space into a form of gamification, right? Take a picture, go ahead and use all of that as a giant green screen and show us what you think Louis Vuitton was. This was the sort of brainchild of the Louis Vuitton ideation studio and Virgil Abloh for his menswear collection. It was wildly successful, and it definitely had a very big social media impact. Lots of impressions from this space. So next up we have Tiffany & Company and Berkshire, which is the sister brand to Zara. Pantone, recognizably, is probably the most widely recognized authority on color when it comes to color and color theory and color recognition. And for some houses and brands, color really does the visual heavy lifting. One in particular on the right is Tiffany & Company, right? Pantone 1837 is the ubiquitous Tiffany blue. No other brand really uses color as effectively as Tiffany & Company to tell their brand story. And it's extremely effective and essential to the core of their brand DNA, right? Pantone 1837 is even patented by Tiffany & Company. So it's a very special color for them. Here you can see this was a pop-up that was the main store on Fifth Avenue. Their larger flagship on Fifth Avenue on the corner of 57th and 5th. You can see those Tiffany blue cabs. You can see the store. And instead of that classic atlas carrying the globe that's generally at the top of the store, we have Charles Tiffany himself. This was in celebration of the CT60 collection. And then to the right of that, we can see Tiffany's first foray into the food and beverage industry, hospitality, with the Blue Box Cafe, right? If you are a fan of the film Breakfast at Tiffany's, right? One of the biggest questions that brand always gets when people walk into the store is, where can we have breakfast? Where's the cafe, right? And up until a couple of years ago, that wasn't possible. And they recently opened up the restaurant. It's very, very small, and it's modeled to look like the inside of the very famous Tiffany blue box. For Hermes, Hermes orange is a part of their house code, right? It's very identifiable from their packaging to their presentations. So for them, color blocking and monochromatic design comes very naturally. Again, we have on the top right that nice sort of crisp yellow, and then the Hermes orange on the bottom. Even down to the way that they even though they've incorporated leather into the orange look, right, it still feels very orangey as opposed to brown, right? So it all sort of matches. Over at Fendi, this is the brainchild of artist Joshua Vides that transformed the Harrods space into this signature artwork, creating this very monochrome contemporary grayscale dining experience. So again, just like Tiffany & Company introduced the Blue Box Cafe, Fendi has also sort of explored the foray into the dining experience and into hospitality. And it's emblazoned, of course, when you walk in, you see those double Fs, the double Fendi logo for Fun Fur in black and white graphics. And joining the cafe on the right is their pop-up Fendi Peekaboo bar, very different from the yellow Peekaboo bar that we saw earlier in the presentation. And this, of course, allows shoppers to fully customize their own mini Peekaboo bag. But black and white here used chromatically in terms of like grayscale. It almost feels like a comic book effect, right? There's something very almost Roy Lichtenstein in this approach to the way that they've built the cafe, but really beautiful and really crisp, and a great example of how white and black can be used monochromatically just as much as any other color. For Bottega Veneta, this was a collaboration or a presentation of their collection at Saks Fifth Avenue. It used the entire Fifth Avenue sprawl of their beautiful window displays. And of course, the inspiration for this was the collection itself. They let the clothing do the talking and inform the way that they designed the space, the way that they designed the windows and the pop-ups. And that includes their runway presentation. So this presentation was done this past year in 2020 during COVID. It was COVID compliant. everyone was socially distanced, masks were required, but because it was very minimal, they used very minimal, there was no contact with the models. It wasn't a classic presentation, but it was widely recognized as being sort of setting the tone for something very smart, very minimal, very monochromatic, and very safe. Over at Chanel Le Rouge, the color red has always had a special place in the sort of dynasty of Chanel. In fact, the first lipstick that Gabrielle Coco Chanel herself built out in 1924 was rouge, was red. So it's a color that's very close to the house and a color that they use very boldly. I actually went to this pop-up with a WindowsWear colleague. And the thing that Chanel, I think, does better, or one of the best in the world, is really their branding. Every corner, every nook and cranny that you explore is absolutely thought out. It is very thoughtful in its approach to the way that they design a space. And the hero of their stories are always front and center, right? For Chanel, it's, the classic jersey suits. It's Chanel No. 5, of course, and then Chanel Beauty, which is what this specific pop-up was dedicated to. When you walked into that space, that's not just a photograph, that's actually a 3D experience that you could walk right through and sort of take all these pictures, again, creating a social media moment, but beautiful use of that Chanel red that's so unique to their house and to their brand. Here again, we see Chanel using monochrome color with this sort of coral interpretation. So taking a look at the product and letting the bits and pieces of the product highlight, pop out, and sort of inspire their window installation. So for Gucci decided to create something called the Gucci Disco Pop-Up. This was done at the South Central Bank in Chicago's West Loop. So they actually, this space used to be a bank, as glamorous as it looks in this photo. It was a lot more functional before that. They completely reinvented this space, right? They wrapped it in this purple geometrical mural that was painted by Colossal Media, and it was adorned with all of these giant disco balls. The pop-up shop inside showcased Gucci's 1970s inspired psychedelic collection, which reimagined the classic logo that was used in Technicolor, right? This is a fantastic example. So this is what that looks like on the inside. So if it didn't look super loud enough on the outside, when you walked inside, instantly, boom, all monochromatic purple, right? It's a great example of maximalism. Oftentimes when we use monochromatic palettes in design or in collection or however you use it, we associate that with minimalism. And this is a great example of the opposite of that, right? It can in fact be very loud and very maximal, right? You can choose to interpret monochromatic design not just as a neutral space, but as a space that really comes alive. For Gucci, the color purple is something that they've used for many seasons now, particularly Alessandro Michele really doesn't shy away from color and really loves the color purple because it tends to be gender neutral. A lot of his collections tend to be gender neutral, even though they're still doing classic runway presentations in menswear and women's wear. Oftentimes they're having transgender models walk down the runway, or they're putting women in menswear or vice versa. So they really like to play with gender, and so that purple really reinforces that for them as a house and as a brand. For their beauty collection, again, nice beautiful seafoam interpretation for Gucci Beauty. This is the Gucci Beauty Station, right? Very retrofitted to feel, while it is technologically advanced, they wanted it to feel very retro and 1970s. So a lot of the buttons and baubles have that very kind of vintage 70s appeal. For Burberry, their animal takeover, and Burberry is a brand that is undergoing a lot of reinvention. They've reinvented themselves when Riccardo Tisci took over as creative director and really infused his sort of brand, his personal sensibility into the house. We saw an entire new insignia come out from there. The Thomas Burberry, which you can see at the top in between those two big giraffes, right? That is their newest logo. And with the new logo, they've really doubled down on monochromatic retail design to really effectively reinforce this brand shift that they are new, even though they are honoring their heritage, right? And they're doing that through the use of warm, neutral earth tones. So for them, monochromatic design was about creating a neutral palette and a neutral space so that the product can be front and center as the focal point of the space or the pop-up shop or the runway presentation. So for Christian Louboutin, right, the Louboutin, this was a pop-up that was done in London, and it incorporates, of course, that classic signature Louboutin red, which is found on the bottom of the Louboutin shoe, and it really immersed consumers with this bold red that has come to define who the brand is, right? This pop-up was designed specifically for the holiday season, which makes the monochromatic red color even more appropriate. Red is a very beautiful and widely used color during the holiday season. And not only are the walls and the carpets red, right, all of the features, save the product themselves, are wrapped in this vibrant red, but it really makes the whole retail experience come to life. Oftentimes when brands use monochrome in the way that they build things, sometimes what can happen is the space ends up looking very flat because the eye just interprets color and it sees a sea of it, and it doesn't necessarily take into account like depth perception. But I think they did a beautiful job here of really using architectural elements to really showcase different shades of red and stay true to their red on the bottom sole of their shoe. For Tory Burch, this is their East Hampton concept store. They have these really sort of feminine white frilly exteriors, right, complemented by this crisp white design of the interior of the store, right? Can white be monochromatic? Absolutely. Just like black and white can be, right? Oftentimes, again, we think we have to go bold with our color and our color overlay to create monochromatic looks that are successful, but I think this is a great interpretation of white being just very classic and very crisp and very clean. And if you're familiar with the East Hamptons, right, this is a summer town, right? It's very laid back, summer style. So this store really captures that, right? It's bright. The products have lots of really cheerful, vivid colors. And the apparel is clearly the feature since the decor and the design of the store maintains this really crisp white element all throughout. They even put their swimwear and their tennis whites front and center, as this is, the Hamptons is a seasonal town, and this tends to be the sort of bread and butter for the Hamptons is summertime and summertime activities. And these tennis whites keep that sort of monochromatic theme of the store while being this also practical purchase for consumers, and people flock to this space, right? Instagrammers like to take photos in front of it. People like to walk inside because it's so light and bright and airy. And if the Hamptons were a store, right, a physical space, if you had to like encapsulate it, this certainly would be at the top of the list. So for Mensur Gavriel, this is a great example of monochromatic color being used to introduce neutrality to a space. So right, while it is a very soft kind of pink, it ends up being a neutral palette because it all blends together. You can see on the right, they have all of their monochromatically laid out products, right, using their color blocking. And there's something very soothing when you use monochromatic design in the right way. It should create a sense of simplicity. It should create a sense of cohesion, and it really should create a sense of like calm and relaxation. And I think that this space absolutely does that. Other spaces that use pink in this way as a neutral, right? Paul Smith, they've used this, what we call like Barbie pink, right? To create a social media moment, to create a moment that stands out. This is from the Paul Smith space in Los Angeles. So when you're driving down the street, you cannot not notice a giant pink building, right? So very smart of them to build that out. And again, if you look at this space on social media, it's wildly popular. People love to take photographs walks in front of it and love to experience the store from the outside. And that's smart design. When you can build an experience that starts 20 feet outside your door, right? That has a powerful impact for consumers. Over on the right side, on the top, we have Sketch London, and then the bottom, the Eloise experience at the Plaza. These are great examples of hospitality, the hospitality industry really embracing monochromatic color. If you've ever been to Sketch in London, which I have had the pleasure of going and having high tea there, it is like a Wes Anderson fever dream, right? It feels very soft and dainty, and pink is a very divisive color. It's a very difficult color to kind of get away with because pink has always been associated with femininity and sort of sugary sweetness, right? Even the idea that I just called Paul Smith's store Barbie Pink reinforces that idea, right? It makes perfect sense that because pink is so sugary and sweet, that we associate it with the hospitality sector, right? A lot of spaces particularly serving desserts and pastries and bake shops, right? Ice cream parlors always incorporate pink into their spaces. Eloise at the Plaza, which is a great experience for young people, particularly young girls, right? It's a classic interpretation of monochromatic pink and the infantilization of pink. Pink being this very precious and very cute color, but really beautiful use of monochromatic design. Particularly in Sketch, when I went there, I was shocked that even the bathrooms, the way that they design the bathrooms, have this monochromatic effect to them. So from Mont Blanc, this was a pop-up that was built in Shanghai, and it debuted last summer. It featured this really highly monochromatic theme utilizing bright royal blue and crisp white throughout their spaces to emphasize and feature their products, right? This setup also allowed for a less distracting and retail environment. It's a great example of smart color overlay. So we can see their use of cobalt blue, of sky blue, of cerulean, right? All being interpreted. But while all that can be overwhelming, it's not because it's overlaid so smartly that the product becomes the focal point of the space. And what they really wanted to do with this pop-up shop was create what they called a modern museum. So it felt like an experience rather than a traditional retail store with a cash wrap, right? It didn't feel like a store per se as much as it felt like you were walking through a museum. For Thom Browne's space, when I think of Thom Browne, I always think of the color gray. Interestingly, that his last name is Brown, but this particular house to me has an absolute association with the color gray. This store occupies 1,600 square feet, set across 2 floors, and features this similar specific design codes of the brand's other retail spaces, right? This was created by a Milan-based architecture practice, ASA Studio. And the concept blends the idea of Leonardo da Vinci's famous drawing Vitruvian Man, which represents the ideals of human proportions. It also introduces or is inspired by Italian interbellum architecture, and arguably the most evident when you look at it is the idea of office spaces. Particularly the inspiration were office spaces, American office spaces in the 1950s, right? So think back to the era of like Mad Men, if you're familiar with that TV show or that specific aesthetic, right? The store is marked by this sort of outer shell of aluminum and glass, and it's combined with this sleek metallic blinds, which paired with this indoor wall predominantly clad in this polished gray marble. The lighting is supposed to be strictly functional, right? Consisting of these tubular lights, but it's suspended in such a way that they really complement the chosen aesthetic. This grayscale and monochromatic gray look is a great example of creating mood, right? To me, interestingly, spaces like this can feel very cold, but to me, it doesn't necessarily feel cold. It doesn't feel industrial, right? It just feels very Thom Browne and true to them as a brand. For Aesop, so this is pulled from their store in Berlin. It was designed by Weiss Heiten, which is their first store, German store. This was directly inspired by an abstract monochromatic artist, right, that created these canvases. It's also inspired by the city's industrial history, and it has a lot of charm I like the use of sea green here, right? It's interestingly, when you use monochromatic design, sometimes in beauty, it can feel very clinical. It can feel very sort of medical or medicinal. But this to me feels almost very organic, right? While it does feel a little kind of like an apothecary, it does not feel clinical to me. Moving on, let's talk about some monochromatic packaging, right? So if you go to YouTube and you type in the word unboxing videos, there are millions of unboxing videos on YouTube. It's one of the biggest sort of, things that are looked up on YouTube. People love to watch unboxing videos, anywhere from little kids who like to watch, toys being opened, to beauty brands doing swatches and samples, to luxury houses, people, opening their brand new Louis Vuitton handbag or, their Gucci sweater, whatever it is. It's become really, really popular. And product design is a really important, and it plays a really important role in your brand representing itself, right? It's definitely, when you're walking into a store, packaging is not necessarily the first thing that you are thinking about, although some brands have been known for their packaging and for their bags, right? It's a great way to have a calling card. The second someone walks out of your store, they are now a brand ambassador for your store and for your brand and for your design. But good packaging design is really important, and we're starting to see a ton of monochromatic interpretations in different kinds of brand packaging. Think about too that in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, everything was shut down. People were not going to stores. They were not going shopping. They were not going to malls, right? They were not going to their big shopping districts. People were doing a lot of shopping online. So when you buy things online, right, the only experience that you have, because you don't have a tangible experience in the store itself, is that package, right? That's the beginning of your journey as a customer with that brand. So it becomes very important. For Gucci, they've created a literal and figurative greener packaging system, right? They've designed and sourced a packaging system that's completely recyclable, and this is taking into account Gucci's house commitment to positively change even further from their use of reusable single-use plastics into something that is more exclusively reusable, right? Here we see that sort of unique damask pattern that recalls the wallpapers and decorative frames. It's usually used to cover books from the Victorian era, but it is something that Gucci has adopted as of late in their packaging. Very successful for them. So for Tory Burch, right, we already saw how they interpret the summer in their monochromatic design, but this is generally, when we think of Tory Burch, we think of that bright orange, and of course we think of the insignia. This is a house that is very logo first, but their packaging is very important to them as well. This is a beautiful use of a monochromatic design in the way that they build their packaging down to the thank you note. These kinds of little touches are really important to consumers, and this is why, people do unboxing videos. They want to see what that experience is like. And it's an expectation at this point for consumers that they have a good packaging experience, right? People don't just expect something in a brown box anymore, right? So for Glossier, some brands use color as their primary form of identification, and that is absolutely the case for Glossier. And as I mentioned earlier, pink can be very divisive, but it's interesting how the beauty industry has really wrapped its head around pink, and how Glossier specifically has taken back millennial pink, right? Glossier began as a digitally native brand, so to see them adopt monochromatic packaging and monochromatic design in all of their brick and mortar flagship spaces, they use this tactic as their primary form of brand association, right? So when you walk into a Glossier space, you instantly know you are there because of that Glossier pink. When you open a Glossier box, even without looking at the product particularly, you instantly know it's Glossier because of that pink box, because of that particularly the pink bubble wrap that they put all of their products in. So it's they're probably one of the most successfully packaged beauty brands to come along in the past 5 years, and they've really leveraged that to their advantage. For Yves Saint Laurent, Saint Laurent is a very sexy brand, right? For them, black is their, poison of choice. And so for their packaging, when you receive a Saint Laurent package, right, it is sleek, it is sexy, it is monochromatic, everything from the thank you note to the product, to the hanger, to the tissue paper. The entire experience is this really beautiful monochromatic experience, right? By the way, if you want to check out any fantastic unboxing videos, we have an entire channel dedicated to exactly that on WindowsWear. So Prada has embraced monochromatic green. Green is, when you use green this way, right? Green makes people feel a multitude of ways. One, they can either associate it with things like money, like currency, right? Or they can associate it with, more generally, what people associate with green is environmentalism, right? They associate it with the earth, they associate it with the environment. So Prada took this opportunity to create this pop-up space that was both tropical and environmental and very, still sort of mixing the idea of raw materials and sort of the environment, but also being kind of futuristic with that nice use of lighting. For La Perla, their luxury lingerie lab, this is the La Perla Lab, which is in New York City. It's in our Soho district. This is 1,000 square feet. So it's a nice, intimate little space on Prince Street. The color washes over the entire space, right? This is very smart for a lingerie brand, because when you're talking about products that are very sort of intimate or small or delicate, right? Your use of monochrome can create just like a very neutral palette, and then it's product forward. So if you're looking at those three mannequins in the back, it almost camouflages right into the background, and all you see are those products on those mannequins. So this is very smartly conceived and very, very easy for La Perla. For Montclair has built, this is their, I believe, third or fourth season with the Montclair House of Genius concept, right? Montclair is, of course, very famous for their outerwear, so we see their puffy coats. They're another house that does not shy away from using color, so here we have a really beautiful interpretation of like cobalt blue. What I love about Montclair's particular stores are their textures, the way that they utilize texture in their design process. So for them, it's not just about monochrome color, it's also about building out something that is has a very a very satisfying tactile experience, just as much as it does a very satisfying looking at it experience. Then we have, there we go, Versace. So again, embracing pink. Their product is their muse. They have their product front and center, from the shoes to the bags, and letting the bags inform the color choice. For the Starbucks Reserve, so this is an interesting example of monochromatic design across different sort of styling elements, right? When I think of Starbucks, I instantly think of that green mermaid, right? On their cups, right? It's so unique to their brand, right? We think of those their cups, but we don't necessarily think of the way that a Starbucks is designed. Now, this is the Starbucks Reserve Roastery. I believe there are like 4 or 5 of them throughout the United States. I believe they're actually international. There's some in Milan as well. But the Reserve is treated more almost like a hospitality experience rather than just a regular Starbucks. In fact, when you walk into the Reserve, they do not have the regular Starbucks menu there. Everything that is built on their menu is specifically curated for these stores and for these experiences, and everything in their design process is beautifully thought out. At the very back of the store, we have the Starbucks star, the Starbucks mermaid. It's not bright green like we're used to seeing it, but we do see that Starbucks logo and insignia that we've come to recognize from them. And anywhere from the materials used to the textures to the use of lighting, right? It all feels very warm. This to me feels like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for coffee, right? And they did a really beautiful job designing this space. And finally, let's end with some Sergio Rossi. So what I like about this monochromatic space is, again, it's product forward, right? But it's also playful. This is a great example of a design that is both practical and neutral, but also has a good sense of humor, right? There's a giant, windy, helter-skelter slide in their store. So they're not taking themselves too seriously as a brand. This, again, creates an interactive moment for the consumer and the brand, which is very smart and a good takeaway. And again, clean, crisp, and beautiful monochromatic design. And then we're going to end with Dior. This is the perfect window or a sort of brand to end with. When I think of Dior, I always think of the Dior gray, the Dior purple. I don't necessarily think of Dior magenta, although this is becoming more and more widely popular for them. They literally have their mannequins floating into the back of their display as actual camouflage, right? So this is, to me, very playful, very smart, and again, a really nice use of monochromatic design. And that does it for our presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Darling, thank you. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. While we are here and while I have your attention, if you are a WindowsWear member, please make sure that your profile is completely filled out and that you are up to date and that you are uploading those projects. If you are an educator that is joining us, please feel free, make sure that your profile is up to date and that your school information is all completely filled out, and please make sure that your students have their profiles filled out as well, as we have a number of opportunities for our students coming up, including our mentorship program. So that's very exciting. And as always, if you are interested in this presentation or others, we offer something called the virtual classroom, in which you can go to our website and sign up for a number of different topics that we can come in and speak to your students. If you want any of the images or the information that I shared today on today's trend presentation, it will be available. It's currently available on our trends page. So if you go to our homepage, go to our trends channel, it will be there right at the top, front and center. So you're welcome to use us as a resource and use any of the information that you learned here today. Thank you so much to all of the folks that have joined us today. Thank you for your feedback. And we look forward to seeing you at our next trend report. Our next trend report will be next month. We're doing them about once a month, but every Monday at 4 p.m. we host WindowsWear Lives, in which we go through retail news and what's happening in the industry. So thank you so much for joining. Please enjoy the rest of your day.